June 7th, 1944. Shortly after dawn, at a headquarters near Paris, General Leo von Schweppenberg studied the map spread across his operations table. The pins marking his Panzer divisions formed a pattern he had designed himself. Panzer Lehr moving from Chartres, the 12th SS Panzer Division advancing from Lisieux. Other armored units converging from across France. On paper, it looked like a hammer about to fall. The Allies had landed in Normandy just 24 hours earlier. Their beachheads were still shallow, still vulnerable, still within reach of a concentrated armored blow. If Guyar's Panzers could reach the coast by nightfall on June 8th, they might still throw the invasion back into the English Channel. Guyar had spent 2 years preparing for this moment. He commanded the most powerful armored reserve in Western Europe. Panzer Lehr alone fielded over 200 tanks and assault guns, plus hundreds of half-tracks and armored vehicles. The 12th SS added another formidable striking force. Together with the other divisions under his coordination, Guyar controlled enough armor to crush any beachhead if he could concentrate it in time. By midnight, he would understand that his panzer army was dying on French roads. Destroyed by an enemy, his training had never prepared him to fight. General Leo von Schweppenberg commanded Panzer Groups, Germany's strategic armored reserve in France. 4 decades in uniform had taught him one lesson. Strike fast, strike hard before the enemy consolidates. He had studied the invasion problem carefully. The first 48 to 70 hours would be critical. During that window, a concentrated panzer attack might split the Allied beaches, just as German armor had done at Dunkirk in 1940. On the morning of June 7th, Guyar had every reason for confidence. Panzer and 12th SS were already moving toward Normandy. The hammer was rising. What Guyar did not yet understand was that the roads themselves had become a battlefield. And on that battlefield, his Panzers had already lost. The reports began arriving shortly after 9 hours. At first, they seemed routine. Scattered mentions of air attacks along the approach routes. A fuel convoy hit near Alençon. A column delayed by cratered roads south of Filets. These were the expected frictions of war, the minor setbacks that every military operation encountered. No campaign ever ran perfectly according to plan. Guyar's staff logged the reports and updated the situation map. The overall picture still looked favorable. Panzer was making progress toward its assembly area. The 12th SS was advancing toward Caen. Other units were in motion across the French road network. The timetable had slipped slightly, but such delays were normal in complex operations involving thousands of vehicles and tens of thousands of men. But as the morning progressed, the pattern in the reports began to change. A Panzer battalion commander reported that his fuel trucks had been destroyed by fighter bombers near Argenton. Without fuel, his tanks had halted in an orchard to wait for resupply that might never come. A 12th SS communications officer reported that his signals vehicles had been caught on an open road and burned. 3 staff cars destroyed, 6 men killed. The regimental command net temporarily silenced. By noon, the individual incidents had become a flood. Guyar stood before the map table as his intelligence officers read the latest messages. Column attack near Thoroughcourt. 14 vehicles destroyed. Ammunition convoy hit outside Vaux. Explosions continuing for 20 minutes as shells cooked off in the burning trucks. Tank transporters caught on the Files Road. 5 Panthers lost before they could even reach the battlefield. A medical unit strafed near Mortagne. Ambulances burning alongside the road. Wounded men dying in the wreckage. The operations officer attempted to maintain the overall picture. The divisions were still moving forward. The schedule had slipped certainly, but the counterattack was still possible. Losses were within acceptable parameters for a major operation. Guyar listened in silence. He was a veteran of campaigns where air attack had been a nuisance, not a catastrophe. He had seen the Luftwaffe dominate the skies over Poland and France in the early years of the war. He had watched German columns advance in daylight, protected by friendly fighters overhead, confident that the sky belonged to them. But the reports continued, and with each hour the picture grew darker. By mid-afternoon, Guyar's staff was tracking a pattern they had never encountered before. The attacks were not random. They were systematic. Every major road leading toward Normandy was under continuous surveillance. Every column that moved in daylight was being found and struck within minutes. The enemy seemed to know exactly where German units were, exactly when they would be vulnerable, exactly how to destroy them piece by piece. Something had changed in warfare, and Guière was only beginning to understand what it was. What Goya could not see from his headquarters near Paris was the machine the Allies had built above the roads of France. By June 1944, the Western Allies controlled an air force of staggering size and sophistication. The American 8th and 9th Air Forces, combined with the British Royal Air Force, could put thousands of aircraft into the sky over France on any given day. For the specific task of destroying German movement, they had developed something unprecedented, an integrated air-ground system designed to turn transportation networks into killing zones. The weapon of choice was the fighter bomber. The American P-47 Thunderbolt was a beast of an aircraft, 7 tons of engine, armor, and firepower that could carry 2,000 pounds of bombs or 8 rockets while still retaining the performance to fight other aircraft. Pilots called it the Jug, short for Juggernaut. It could absorb punishment that would destroy lighter fighters. The British Hawker Typhoon was equally fearsome. Armed with 860 Dalbiel rockets, each capable of penetrating the armor of most German vehicles, the Typhoon had been specifically optimized for attacking armored columns and strong points. Its pilots had trained for months on the art of the diving attack, releasing their rockets at precisely the right angle and altitude to maximize destruction, while minimizing their own exposure to ground fire. But the aircraft were only part of the system. Months before D-Day, Allied planners had launched the Transportation Plan, a systematic campaign to destroy French railways, bridges, and road junctions. In May 1944 alone, Allied bombers had dropped tens of thousands of tons of explosives on rail yards from Paris to the English Channel. Bridges across the Seine and Louise rivers had been systematically demolished. Key road junctions had been cratered and recatered until they became impassable. The goal was simple. When the invasion came, German divisions would find their railways broken and their roads funneled into predictable routes that Allied aircraft could patrol with deadly efficiency. Then for the invasion itself, the Allies deployed something Guière had never faced: real-time tactical control that linked aircraft to ground forces in a seamless network. Mobile radar stations, some mounted on trucks near the Normandy beaches, could track aircraft across the battle area. Ground control centers maintained radio contact with fighter bomber squadrons, directing them toward targets reported by reconnaissance flights or forward observers. Army liaison officers at Corps headquarters could request airstrikes and see aircraft overhead within minutes. The entire system was bound together by radio networks and standardized procedures that allowed instant communication between ground and air. The result was a network that functioned almost like a living organism. A German column would begin moving on a French road. Within minutes, a reconnaissance aircraft or a ground observer would report its location. The report would reach a control center. Controllers would vector the nearest fighter bombers toward the target. Pilots would dive out of the sky, release their weapons, and climb away before the Germans could organize effective anti-aircraft fire. Then another flight would arrive, and another. The attacks were relentless, methodical, and devastatingly effective. German soldiers who survived these attacks described the experience as being hunted. There was no safe time, no safe route, no safe distance from the battlefield. The sky had eyes everywhere, and those eyes directed weapons that struck without warning. On June 7, 1944, the P-47 of the American 9th Air Force flew over 2,000 fighter-bomber sorties in support of the Normandy landings. The RAF Typhoons added hundreds more. Every major road within 100 kilometers of the beaches was under continuous patrol from first light until darkness fell. Guière's Panzer divisions were not advancing into battle. They were advancing into a trap, and the jaws of that trap were closing with every hour that passed. By 1500 hours on June 7th, the reports reaching Panzer Group West headquarters had become impossible to ignore. Panzer Division, the elite formation that Guière was counting on to spearhead the counterattack, was bleeding on the road south of Caen. The division commander, General Fritz Berlin, had reported that his columns were under continuous air attack. Fuel trucks were burning. Ammunition vehicles were exploding. Half-tracks carrying Panzer grenadiers were scattered across the French countryside. Their crews seeking cover in ditches and orchards, wherever they could find shelter from the aircraft circling overhead. Berlin himself had nearly died that morning. His command car had been strafed by thunderbolts while crossing an open stretch of road near Argentine. He had survived only by throwing himself into a ditch while machine gun bullets stitched patterns in the earth around him. When he emerged, shaking with adrenaline, his car was burning, and 2 of his staff officers were dead. The general who was supposed to lead the counterattack had spent an hour hiding in a drainage ditch like an infantryman. The tanks themselves often survived individual attacks. A Panzer IV, or a Panther, could absorb machine gun fire, and bombs had to strike close to destroy such heavily armored vehicles. But the tanks could not fight without fuel. They could not fight without ammunition. They could not fight without the infantry and artillery that made them part of a combined arms formation, capable of sustained offensive operations. And all of those supporting elements were being systematically destroyed. Berline's war diary recovered after the war recorded the scale of the destruction. In a single day's march, Panzer lost over 80 vehicles to air attack. Most were soft-skinned transports, fuel trucks, and support vehicles, but the losses included 5 tanks destroyed before they ever saw an enemy ground unit. His division was being dismembered on the march. The 12th SS Panzer Division fared no better. Its columns pushing toward K from the east were caught on open roads in the afternoon sunlight. Typhoons armed with rockets descended on the young soldiers of the Hitler-Jugend Division with methodical precision. Veterans who had survived years on the Eastern Front themselves, helpless against an enemy they could not shoot back at. An enemy that struck from the sky and vanished before any response was possible. At Panzergruppe West headquarters, Gueyer's staff tried to maintain order. They rerouted columns onto secondary roads. They ordered movement restricted to dawn and dusk. They requested Luftwaffe fighter cover to protect the approaching panzers. The request went unanswered. The Luftwaffe, gutted by months of attrition over the Reich, could not contest Allied air superiority over France. German fighters that rose to challenge the Allied aircraft were outnumbered and hunted down. On June 7th, the Luftwaffe flew fewer than 300 sorties over Normandy. The Allies flew over 10,000. By evening, Gueyer faced a situation his training had not prepared him to address. His divisions were still nominally moving toward Normandy. Arrows on the map still pointed toward the beaches. But the reality behind those arrows had become a nightmare of burning vehicles, scattered units, and broken communications. The counterattack he had planned was not going to happen on June 8th. Perhaps not on June 9th. Perhaps never. The moment of clarity came sometime after 9 p.m. Guy stood alone before the operations map. His staff had retreated to their duties, processing the endless stream of reports, trying to impose order on chaos. The headquarters was quiet, except for the clatter of teleprinters and the murmur of radio operators speaking in low voices. The map showed what should have been happening. Arrows converging on Kun, divisions massing for the decisive blow, the armored fist preparing to strike. But Gueyer had spent the day reading casualty reports, logistics summaries, and increasingly desperate messages from his divisional commanders. He knew what the arrows concealed. Panzer had lost perhaps 30% of its transport capacity in a single day's march. The fuel trucks that survived were nearly empty, and resupply convoys were being destroyed faster than they could be organized. The 12th SS had arrived near Caen, with its units scattered across kilometers of French countryside. Its fuel reserves nearly exhausted, its communications disrupted. Other divisions were still days away, crawling forward on damaged railways and cratered roads. The concentrated armored blow he had envisioned was already impossible. His divisions would reach the front eventually, but they would arrive piecemeal, exhausted, under strength, short on fuel and ammunition. They would be fed into the battle one unit at a time, as reinforcements rather than as a striking force. And the Allies, they were landing more troops every hour, more tanks, more artillery, more of everything. By the time Gueyer's panzers could mass for a coordinated attack, the beachhead would be too strong to break. Gueyer had spent his career studying armored warfare. He understood the mathematics of concentration, the physics of breakthrough, the logistics of exploitation. He had mastered the art of moving large formations across hostile territory to strike decisive blows. But he had never faced an enemy who could see every movement and strike every column. He had never fought a war where the roads themselves were the battlefield, where the approach march was the battle, where formations were destroyed before they could deploy. He understood now the war he had trained for. The war of tanks against tanks, of concentration and maneuver, of decisive armored thrusts. That war was over. A new kind of warfare had replaced it. A war of systems and networks and information. A war where the side that controlled the sky controlled everything beneath it. Germany had lost that war before the 1st Panzer rolled toward Normandy. Gueyer continued to issue orders. He continued to coordinate movements and allocate resources. He did his duty as he had always done. But somewhere in the quiet hours of that June night, he stopped believing his panzers would throw the Allies back into the sea. The mathematics no longer permitted it. The days that followed confirmed what Guerre had understood. On the night of June 7th, his panzer divisions reached the Normandy front. Eventually, Panzer Lehr engaged British forces around Tilly-sur. The 12th SS fought fiercely near Caen, earning a fearsome reputation for tenacity and skill that impressed even their enemies. Individual tank battles produced moments of tactical success. German crews, many of them veterans of the Eastern Front, fought with skill and determination. But the strategic moment had passed. By June 9th, over 300,000 Allied troops were ashore. By June 12th, over 400,000 tanks, artillery, ammunition, fuel, all of it flowed across the beaches in quantities that dwarfed German logistics capacity. The beachhead that might have been vulnerable on June 7th had become an unbreakable fortress by June 10th. The counterattack Guerre had planned was never launched. Instead, his divisions were committed to a defensive battle, trying to contain an enemy whose strength grew every day while German strength slowly bled away. On June 10th, 3 days after the invasion, the Allies located Guerre's headquarters near the village of Lane, southwest of Caen. Intelligence from aerial reconnaissance, radio intercepts, and resistance reports had identified the concentration of vehicles and communications equipment. Shortly before 1900 hours, a force of RAF Typhoons and medium bombers struck the headquarters compound. Bombs and rockets saturated the area. Staff officers were killed at their desks. Communications equipment was destroyed. Maps and plans were scattered or burned. Guerre himself was seriously wounded by shrapnel, fragments tearing into his body as he tried to reach shelter. The attack on Lane destroyed Panzergruppe West as a functioning headquarters. Command and control of German armored operations in Normandy devolved to improvised arrangements. Guerre was evacuated to a hospital in the rear and eventually relieved of command. In his post-war writings, Guerre reflected on what had happened. He did not blame his staff or his soldiers. He did not claim that better tactics or earlier movement could have changed the outcome. He blamed himself and all German commanders for failing to understand how completely the nature of warfare had changed. The decisive battle, he wrote, was not fought at the beaches. It was fought on the roads leading to the beaches, where Allied airpower erased Germany's last hope of concentrating enough force to matter. The Battle of Normandy continued for 2 more months. German forces fought for every hedgerow, every village, every crossroads. The panzer divisions that had been savaged on the roads of June 7th continued to resist with determination and skill. They inflicted heavy casualties on Allied forces. They contested every advance. They made the liberation of France a bloody, grinding struggle that cost tens of thousands of lives on both sides. But none of it changed the fundamental equation that had been established in those first 24 hours. The Germans were fighting a defensive campaign now, trading space for time, bleeding strength they could not replace. The initiative had passed to the Allies and would never return. The window for reversing the invasion had closed within the first 24 hours. When we ask what decided the fate of D-Day, the answer may lie less in the drama of Omaha Beach and more in the burning convoys scattered across the French countryside. The Allied soldiers who stormed the beaches deserved their place in history, but so did the pilots, the controllers, the radar operators, and the logistics officers who built a system that destroyed Germany's armored reserve before it could fight. In 1940, German panzers had advanced across France in sweeping, fast-moving formations, while the sky remained, if not friendly, at least contested. The Luftwaffe had protected those columns, had strafed enemy positions, had kept Allied aircraft away from the vital roads and rail lines. In 1944, the German armored reserve tried to repeat that miracle under completely different conditions. The roads that had once been highways to victory had become killing grounds. The concentration that had once been the key to breakthrough had become impossible under the watching eyes of Allied reconnaissance. Systems defeated courage. Mathematics defeated will. And the general who spent 24 hours watching his panzer army die on French roads learned a lesson that would define warfare for generations to come. Control the sky, and you control everything beneath it. Thanks for watching. If you found value in this story, like this video and subscribe to the channel. We focus on bringing you the forgotten stories and nuanced truths of World War II that deserve to be remembered. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more stories from World War II, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more forgotten battles, hidden histories, and untold soldier stories to life. And let me know your thoughts in the comments. What event or perspective would you like to see next? I read every comment.